Hi, good evening and welcome to the ninth Nagari rerun. We have the team of Beyond Four Walls with us, Aila, Ritika, and Bimal. So we at the Charles Korea Foundation. I'm Advait, and we at the Charles Korea Foundation have started this program called Nagari Reruns, which basically looks at the films that were made as a part of the Nagari short film competition in 2020. So we basically try and initiate conversation with the filmmakers and the mentor, and try and sort of resurface them with the current theme of livelihoods and the city, which is the theme of Nagari Short Film Competition 2021. So the format of the event will be we'll be watching the film, and then we'll be having a question answer session and a conversation with the filmmakers that we have. We'll start the film.
No eviction at all. They are not owned one. Just occupied, that's all. Illegal occupation, that's all. And that also the government not removed anyone.
ஸ்ட்ரைட்டாக வந்து கையை வடிச்சாங்க, ஜேசிபி கூப்பிட்டு வந்தாங்க, இடிச்சிட்டாங்க. உடனே டக்கு டக்குன்னு சாமான் எடுத்து வச்சு அமுச்சு விட்டாங்க.
எனக்கு 52 வயசு ஆகுதுமா. என்னோடய பேர் அஞ்சாலை. நாங்கள் எங்கள் பூர்வீகமே பூவையில் தான் வாழ்ந்தோம். பெரிய பாரிஸில் தான் நாங்கள் வாழ்க்கையை நடத்தினோம். பாட்ட காலில் எங்கள் அம்மா எங்கள் அப்பா காலத்தில் இருந்து அவங்க வந்து 70 வருஷமாக அந்த பூர்வீகம் அந்த பூகையில் வாழ்ந்துருந்தாங்க. நாங்களும் வந்து 42 வருஷமாக அங்கே இருந்தோம். பாரிஸ்லேயே இருந்தோம். ரொம்ப நல்லா வசதியாக இருந்தோம். நாங்கள் எந்த கஷ்டமே தெரியாது. நம்மளுக்கு பஸ் செலவும் இல்லை, எந்த இதுவும் இல்லை. பக்கத்தில் ஸ்கூல் இருக்குது. பிள்ளைங்களுக்கு ஏதோ சம்பாதிச்சுன்னு வந்தால் அந்தந்த டைமுக்கு சாப்பாடு செய்து அதுங்களுக்கு போடலாம். உள்ளே தான் போகலாம், பஸ் ஸ்டாண்ட் உள்ளே தான். இல்லை நைட்டில் வண்டிங்க போகாது, வண்டிங்க வராது, ஜனங்க நடமாட்டேங்குது. குளிச்சிக்கோ நைட்டில் மணி 2 மணிக்கு 1 மணிக்கு. நான் பார்க்கணும் பஸ் வருதா இல்லையான்னு பார்த்து அதுங்களை வச்சுன்னு தான் காப்பாற்றணும். ஒரு பயம்தான் இருக்குது. நாங்கள் அப்போ தான் வாழ்ந்துட்டோமே, அது எங்களுக்கு தெரியாது.
6 வருஷத்தில் வந்து எல்லா மாற்றமும் வருஷம் இல்லை. 6 வருஷம் 6ஆம் மாதம் 22ஆம் தேதி நம்ம டோட்டலாக ஏரியா வச்சுருக்கோம்.
பாரிஸ்லேயே இருந்தோம். ரொம்ப நல்லா வசதியாக இருந்தோம். நாங்கள் இங்கே வாயிறதோடு அங்கே வாயிறது தான் எங்களுக்கு நல்ல வாழ்க்கை. எங்களோட வாழ்க்கையே வேஸ்ட்டாக போச்சு. இந்த இடத்துல வந்து போகிறதுக்கு வர்றதுக்கு 2 மணி நேரம் 2 மணி நேரம் ஆகிடுது. 2 மணி நேரத்தில் நாங்கள் அது இப்போ போய் என்ன சம்பாதிக்கிறது. இங்கே வந்து சோறாக்கி துண்டுற கூட நேரம் இல்லை எங்களுக்கு. 200-300 சம்பாதிக்கிறது பஸ்ஸுக்கே போயிடுது. அதை நாங்கள் வச்சு என்னத்தை நாங்கள் வீடு குடும்பம் நடத்தின்னு வர்றது, பிள்ளைங்களுக்கு என்ன செலவு பண்ணுறது. 1 to 1 நாளைக்கு எங்களுக்கு கொடுத்துன்னு இருந்தாங்க. தண்ணி வசதி வந்து அதுக்கப்புறம் 2 நாள் பொறுத்து வந்தது. அதுக்கப்புறம் 3 நாள் ஒரு வாட்டி தண்ணி வந்தது. அதுக்கப்புறம் இப்போ வர்றது வந்து 10 நாளைக்கு ஒரு வாட்டி, இல்லை ஒரு வாரத்துக்கு ஒரு வாட்டி, ஒரு நாளைக்கு ஒரே ஒரு நாள் தான் விட்றாங்க தண்ணி. அந்தமாரி விட்டால் நாங்கள் பிள்ளைங்களை குளிப்பாடுறதா, இல்லை இருக்கிற நாங்கள் குளிக்கிறதா, இல்லை சாப்பாடு யூஸ் பண்ணுறதா, இல்லை துணிமணியை சுத்தம் பண்ணுறதா, இவ்வளோலாம் வசதி இங்கே இல்லை. காவை அடுப்பு ரொம்ப கிளச்சி இது வேறு பிள்ளைங்களுக்கு அடிக்கடிக்கு உடம்பு சரியில்லாத உயிர்து. ஒரே ஒரு அம்மா ஆஸ்பத்திரி தான் இருக்குது. அர்ஜென்ட்டுக்குன்னு போனாங்க பார்க்க மாட்டாங்க. மித்ததெல்லாம் பணம் கட்டி தான் வெளியே பார்க்கணும். ஆனால் கவர்மெண்ட் ஹாஸ்பிட்டல்லாம் கட்டலாம் அந்த இடத்துல. ஆனால் எவ்வளோ உயிர் தான் சாதாரணம் அந்த இடத்துல. அங்கே எதனா ஒன்று ஆச்சுன்னா ஜிஹெச் எரிஞ்சதுக்கு வந்து கேஎம்ஸு, அப்படி இல்லையா ஸ்டாலின் தான் வரும். இப்போ 25 கிலோமீட்டர்லேருந்து வரணும். அந்த உயிருக்கு என்ன கேரண்டி? பையன் அந்த தானே கொஞ்ச நேரம் அதை அங்கே வந்து தூக்கின்னு வந்து கேஎம்சியில் சாங்காட்டியும் பிள்ளை இருந்துச்சு. அங்கேருந்து தூக்கின்னு 25 கிலோமீட்டர்லேருந்து தூக்கின்னு வர்றதுக்கு அரை ஹவரில் போகுதுன்னா அது நம்மளோட மனசு நம்ம பெற்று அதை வளர்த்து எவ்வளோ கஷ்டப்பட்டு இருக்கு. இப்போ திடீர்னு அவருக்கு வீடு இடம்ன்றாங்க. இந்த இடத்த மாற்றி செங்கல்பட்டு லைனில் கொடுக்குறேன்றாங்க. நாங்கள் இங்கேருந்து போகிறதுக்கே எவ்வளோ சிரமப்படுறோம். இன்னும் அந்த செங்கல்பட்டு லைனில் போனால் எங்களுக்கு எவ்வளோ சிரமம் இருக்கும். அங்கேருந்து போயிட்டு வரோம். எப்படி போகிறதுக்கு வர்றதுக்கே லைஃபே போயிடுமா? பிறந்தது வளர்ந்ததே இந்த இடம் தான். எங்களுக்கு சம்பாரணை கொடுக்குறதே இந்த இடம் தான். நாங்கள் போய்க்கிறதும் இந்த இடம் தான். இந்த இடத்த விட்டு நாங்கள்
Thank you so much. So I think this film sort of comes through as a very interesting film, even for Nagari and Nagari reruns, is because it sort of looks at housing inadequacy and it also looks at livelihood. So to start with, we were wondering if you guys could share a little about the process and what sort of helped you pick up this topic, this place and the city, and how you sort of weave the narrative across the film.
So when we got to know about housing being the theme last year, I think what came to our mind was the whole process of relocation. And I was new to Chennai and I didn't know how to really go about with it. So there's this organization called the Vetiver Collective, run by Nityanand Jayaraman. And he kind of got in touch with this lady called Geeta. She runs this unorganized workers federation. And she works, I still remember, I think me and Bimal, we went to her union meeting about the fishers community, rights of the fishers community fishing community in Chennai. And that's where we got discussing with her, and she spoke about Kannagi Nagar and how Parry's corner the people living in Parry's corner comes under her purview. Like she sort of takes care of their ins and out. And she said that we should go and start speaking to these people, because a lot of these people, actually most of them, have been relocated. So there's this dental wing that was being constructed, and that's when these people were asked to leave, and they were given houses in Kannagi Nagar. So even though most of them have a house to their name, they basically still live in Paris. So I think that was something that was very interesting, because Paris as a place also adds to the economy of Chennai. So these are also people who are actively contributing that economically to Chennai. So how do housing for them change? And also while creating, I think through the process, we also realized how house and home can mean so many different things. There's this woman, Anjali, who doesn't have a roof, but it's just a pavement. But how that is more home to her than a place which gives her shelter, possibly, or water, right? So yeah, that is how it started, and then we kind of dig deeper, and yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think when we heard housing and we started discussing housing itself, for us, it wasn't just the physical structure of the house. So livelihood was an extremely important component for us when we thought about housing inadequacy. For us, gender was an important component when we talked about housing inadequacy. And coming from that theory of urban background, and Anjali's story just like put the whole theory into one single individual story that we could see. So yeah, that made a lot of sense to us.
Bimal, you would like to add in?
Yeah, also, again, as Ritika was mentioning, the three of us are not really native to Chennai specifically. So while exploring the city in our own journeys, it was very interesting to see that there were certain locations which, like for example, Kannagi Nagar is another location that we highlighted in the film. And Kannagi Nagar, if you type Kannagi Nagar on Google, you can find these amazingly, there are incredibly huge portraits that have been painted across the buildings in Kannagi Nagar. So visually, that was something that we noted, and we wanted to try to understand what the situation was over there as well. And then from there, the whole vetiver scene also came into the picture, and it became a thing altogether as well. So when we got into the project, I think it was a very we felt that we were trying to figure something out. And once we got to Anjali, we understood that Anjali has a very interesting story. But when we got there, also we understood that that is the story of many people residing in both of the areas. So,
also, it's interesting because I remember Kannagi Nagar being just 10 minutes away from our workplace. And for me, we never knew a place like that existed. So like the first time we were meeting someone from Geeta's team in Kannagi Nagar, and we just reached there in like less than 10 minutes. I'm like, this entire world exists here. Like even the leading up to that place in Kannagi Nagar, which we've not done a lot of justice actually in the film, but that space of Kannagi Nagar is like this huge world in itself, because moving forward, we'll discuss how there are people from areas of flood and cyclone who've been brought up from those places and put here. So they've been picked up from their places of identity into this new place where they have to reclaim that sense of identity. So it's like a world in itself. So I think it was interesting that way to take that forward. Yeah.
So I mean, with that sort of an introduction as to what sort of got you into the film, the film talks about livelihood as a workplace, Paris as a workplace, and the idea of housing through Kannagi Nagar. So just trying to understand the proximity of a workplace to housing. I mean, it's a crucial design parameter to a city and a planning parameter to the city. So from what you saw in Chennai, how do you think that the planning of cities shapes the lives of people trying to earn a livelihood in the city?
I think, okay, that's actually an extremely interesting question. And I think there's theories and theories around it. But from what we could see, we could very clearly see that Paris as a space of living and working was built by the people. It came about because the people were there and the people were doing what they were doing. It was a market, it was a home. But Kannagi Nagar was a planned neighborhood. The state planned it, and the state planned it without consultation with the people who were going to be living there. So there is a very visible and direct clash between what the people want and what the planners want. With all my love for planners, I say that. And one crucial link between these two then becomes transportation, which is also under the purview of planning itself. And I think the most beautiful way someone has described transportation is when Sonal Shah said it's the fulcrum that connects people from homes to opportunities of economic independence. And it matters most to women. And when women are shifted away from their home workplace locations to these resettlement colonies, they lose their jobs. They simply just exit the workforce, which is extremely concerning as well. So a lot of times I feel like development in Indian cities happens in contestation with planning and not in conversation with it. Yeah, I mean, if you want to add anything else, but that's what I was thinking.
I mean, Bimal, would you like to add anything?
Yeah, so I think what became, like I was saying earlier also, like how livelihood became, like it's not just about earning money, because now you know you would question, or I would stand to question, like if you have Anjali come to Kannagi Nagar, why can't she start the same food business, the flower business here? Why can't she start selling flowers here as well? It's because like as soon as you take her away from Paris, she loses that identity that she had. Because another interesting thing, like she's not just connected to Paris for her own livelihood, she's also connected to Paris for other people's livelihood. Like she is someone who procures the ice buckets and the flowers, so to say, but there are other women under her who basically build the garlands, and then she takes them to the market to sell. So she's built this space where this is this lady who is giving others a livelihood, and you take that away from her when you take her to Kannagi. And I feel like when in these process of creating a resettlement area, which becomes necessary sometimes, yes, we should keep in mind how we are placing these spaces in comparison, discussions with the people we are resettling, because in our discussions we realize that there are a lot of resettlement areas in and around Paris as well. So why is it that these folks are sent all the way 25-30 kilometers away to Kannagi? That's clearly because they don't know who they are shifting, or they've not been, and maybe the places near Paris does not have a lot of places to accommodate these people, but that has not been in consultation with these people who are being relocated. And in the film also she talks about how her son couldn't be taken to a hospital nearby because there's not a hospital nearby, and you're creating this huge mass of resettlement area, and to not have a hospital nearby, or to not invest in a hospital for all of these people, I think that also becomes a part of the planning that we're talking about when we are saying, because this, I think, I don't know, correct me if I'm wrong, Aila, but as much as this is part of the planning of the city, but this is also a planning in itself of a mini world, so to say. So yeah, we realize that becomes quite important.
And just to add, also with respect to our conversations with Anjali as well, Anjali, when we asked her this question of, you have transportation is available for you to go from maybe a Kannagi Nagar to a Parry. Her retort was on the lines of, I have to sit or travel for close to 1 to 2 hours, and that's a loss of 1 to 2 hours for me.
Yeah.
One day, compounded by the fact that it costs money as well. So, and for someone like Anjali, for whom business is active at certain points of time in the day, and other points of time in the day becomes, because we are looking at the business of flower gardens and whatnot, freshness becomes it becomes very important as well. So when we consider all of these things, Anjali's question is also that, like, how much of my time should I put into this whole thing? This whole but traveling from one point to another is costing me money, is costing me time. What is this? So, I mean, that also becomes a huge part of what we're trying to understand here as well. It's not about convenience per se. It's also about, is this something that's putting you in a huge amount of difficulty?
Yeah.
Right. I mean, of course, we can try to make things convenient, but then this is the exact opposite of that. This is like making sure that we've got all systems in place to make sure that it's going to be more difficult for you to do what you have to do. So,
Yeah.
this is another addition. Yeah.
But what actually also... please continue.
Sorry, just also want to build on Bimal's concept of cost. And I think because I'm the gender wali aurat, I'm going to say it. And especially for women, when Anjali is that one sentence where she goes, do we bathe ourselves, our children, cook or wash? These are all responsibilities that she becomes responsible for. And then when the house is 5 minutes away from the workplace, it's something she can manage and she can take care of. We can go on a tangent and say, but why should women be responsible for household work? But she is. Today and tomorrow, she is responsible for that work. And the cost of transportation in terms of time, which women are extremely poor for. Time poverty is a real thing. And when that gets compounded, the financial burden increases even more. So yeah, just when he said cost, I just had to add that.
Yeah. I mean, I was actually interested to know, like, there must be multiple vendors who are at the Parrys with Anjali. So, I mean, considering Kannagi Nagar is one of the biggest sort of resettlements that has happened across India, maybe, what has happened to the other people who were there with Anjali as to were they also resettled at Kannagi Nagar, and what is their outlook about the whole idea of business now? Because I'm sure that because they are running out of Paris, they have a very sort of a micromanaged way of doing business where everybody is sort of interrelated in some ways.
So I remember this lady Savitri, if I'm not wrong, Savitri, and she was one of the people we spoke to before actually going on to Anjali, and she actually loves the fact that she has a space in Kannagi. She loves that, and on this day that we were talking to her, she was gonna take a bus to Kannagi that afternoon because it was raining in Chennai at this point of time, and she would take her clothes there to dry it off and then take her time, utilize that space and come back again in the morning. And compared to Anjali, this is a lady who, so you go through the bus terminal, you have the main road, you have Paris Corner. You come back at the very back end, you have the place where they live in their tents. So this lady, Savitri, she basically sells her flour right at this place, this junction. So it's not even like she has a big place in the main Pukadai area, in the main flower market area, but she also chooses. So everyone's relationship with Kannagi Nagar is different. Some people don't cease to, like, for example, for Anjali, her son and his family live in her house, which she has in Kannagi Nagar, and she's very detached from the idea of she has a place there. Like I think during our shoot, her sister's her niece passed away, and that's what made her go to Kannagi Nagar, but she doesn't do that very often. Whereas there is this other lady who loves the fact that she's got a house in Kannagi Nagar, she has a roof, but at the same time, she also, so everyone's relationship with Kannagi Nagar is different, but what was very common when you ask a change of occupation is Paris and their life with Paris. So very few that we met actually, even though they have got a place in Kannagi Nagar, they still choose to come back to Paris. And that also raises question to another thing that happens in Kannagi Nagar. A lot of kids are left unattended because parents are gone for like 2-3 weeks and they only come back over the weekend sometime. So that leads us to a different level of discussions about the whole gang war and the drug abuse that happens in Kannagi, but that's a different discussion. What I'm trying to say is that very less people we interacted have actually made the physical move to Kannagi and given it a thought that let's start a new business here. And a few of them who have, they don't do it in the large scale as they used to do in Paris, and they do make their way back to Paris sometime or the other to make that extra buck. Yeah.
I think this is actually not just in Chennai. We see this in multiple cities in India where there is almost a generalization and stereotype that says, you know, if you give homeless people and squatters resettlement housing, they'll sell the resettlement housing and they'll come back and live on the streets anyway because they like doing it. I've had government officers actually say this to me, so I know that this kind of a thought exists. But all the things that Ritika just pointed out, we just need to think about why people are doing that, why people are choosing to live on the footpath, on the pavement, instead of in a house with 4 walls, right? And all these factors add to it.
I mean, actually, also the film starts with this statement or dialogue by the shopkeeper, where he sort of has a statement about people who are living in Paris. So we were actually wondering as to what is the kind of coexistence that exists in that city or in that area, and how does the city look at it? Because I think it's important to sort of also because considering as Bimal and you guys were saying that Paris actually is a business hub of some sorts because it has monetary contribution to the city, which means the city needs it in many ways, not one. So we were just wondering how is this coexistence and how does it work out on a city level?
Yeah, that's actually a very interesting question with all kinds of informal settlements. It's you want to buy the flowers and you want to use them in the house, but you don't want the person selling the flowers to be outside your house. You want domestic workers, you need them, but you don't want them to be living anywhere near your gated community. So I think informality in cities plays out in very different ways. There are some places in the city that are just that are given up by a lot of city residents. We know that these are poor areas, these are unsafe areas. Children are told not to go to these areas. Anything can happen there. Nobody cares. But when it becomes the center of the city, when the real estate prices start going up, when this place becomes a place of economic activity where bigger and bigger shops and bigger livelihood patterns start coming up, there's shops and stuff that coming up, then street vendors become a problem. Street vendors then become somebody that has to be removed from there and put somewhere else. We saw this in Chennai in Bondi Bazaar, where they resettled all the street vendors into one big building. And if you walk into that building, like you can see that these are street shops. They display the visualness of that is very street shops, but they're all in a building because we did not want them on the street. But yeah, I mean, specifically about Paris, I think Ritika can add, but I think this is something that goes on in all our cities.
So it's interesting that you pointed out the man in the beginning, because I think our intention when we were shooting, we thought that we'd get some more information from him about how the Pukara, the flower market actually works. Maybe he can talk us through how the resettlement happened, when they came in and asked these people to leave. But to the contrary, he actually completely refuted the fact that there is something like this happening right across the street behind the bus terminal. And this man claims, I don't know, correct me if I'm wrong, Bimal, but 400 years? Yeah, 100 years of his shop has been there for years now, like his great grandfather has been running it. And this is just next to the Pookarai, and he's clearly been witness to all the happenings, but he chooses, or maybe is I don't know what's the right word. I don't want to put him in a position, but that's why we didn't choose to use his face, because I felt I don't know his intentions behind when he speaks like that. Whether he's made aware of it or he chooses not to be aware of it. Sorry for that. Yeah, whether he chooses or he's very deliberately not made aware of how things are happening. But interestingly, people in the Pookarai, in the flower market also, I remember this guy who also just.
I think there's some audio stuff going on. So
sorry, yeah. So there was this guy in the flower market, and he also was very. You would think that this is a community, but he was also very oblivious of someone who's just sitting right across him, because he also wasn't aware of something like this that's happening behind the bus terminal. So yeah, that's interesting that you would point out people within the community at the place of livelihood, and also other people in bigger shops around the space somehow did not agree or did not accept the fact that something like this is happening. Yeah.
And as a general observation as well, like this is just observational from how we were there, because was that that lack of empathy you could see on from this man altogether. kind of like was reflective of the fact that, I have a shop that has a shade over it, and whatever is on the road, I don't care about, is the kind of attitude that we could sense from his end. And even when he's very proud of the fact that it's his shop. He's very proud of the fact that it was his shop. He owns that piece of land or whatever. So whereas, and when he says, he very very vividly mentioned that, these people are all encroaching the land. So that whole aspect of, I own, you don't, so you don't deserve to be there, was very very apparent. And I mean, if people around the place are thinking like that, I think it's also a reflection on the city, and it's also a reflection on how the government thinks about the whole situation as well. So yeah.
It's also a reflection of how private property is private property, but public property is not public property.
Yeah,
But I
also
think-
like how
No,
Aila
please
spoke
continue.
about the informality. In a lot of them have this argument of formalizing, give them, if you give them this space, this structure. But in this process, again, going back, in this process of trying to formalize or resettle, like who are the people we're trying to benefit? And how come they become, I'm again sorry, but how come they become aloof of this process? How come they are not at the center of this decision making? Like, when do you want to be relocated? Do you want to be relocated? How far? What are you dependent on here? Things like that. Yeah, so the whole process of formalizing is something that a lot of people use, and they take a step ahead and say that, it would better their lives. But in that statement again lies a problem, like at the cost of what, and in consultation with whom. Yeah.
I mean, it's sort of, like as Bimal sort of picked it up some time back regarding the Kannagi Nagar, and it sort of having those portraits and paintings painted over it. I mean, and then it becoming an art district. So we're actually just wondering as to, so I just had a small query as to, could you sort of talk to people, or rather inquire about why Kannagi Nagar was chosen to be the location for the resettlement of such a big scale? Because considering, please correct me if I'm wrong, like considering the fact that this was a resettlement that was for the people who were flood affected in Chennai, right? So does it have any merit when it comes to its geographical location? Because as probably Kannagi Nagar sort of displaced, and this was sort of placed from the less, or rather the more affected areas of flooding that happened in Chennai. So was there a reason why the location of Kannagi Nagar was supposed to be that? On the contrary, and why wasn't it sort of placed closer to the metro or the main core of the city or so forth?
Couple of reasons. When we had done fieldwork in Kannagi Nagar a couple of years ago, that reality that Kannagi Nagar itself is marshland. It's not in a non-flood prone area at all. And also in all resettlement colonies in general, real estate plays a very big role because the state has to own the land on which they're building this. So it's usually very, very far away from the city. And it has to be in a location that is not going to become an upper middle class suburb anytime soon. So it has to be in the direction that the city is not growing. So from a planning point of view, these are the aspects that come into place. Specifically for Kannagi Nagar, I am not sure.
Yeah, also I don't think it was, according to its location, it's not actually at the center or at the core of the city at all. It's I think it's taking people away from the core of the city, because Paris is somewhat, correct me if I'm wrong, is at the center of economically and position wise as well. So and when she mentioned that they're being taken away further to Chengalpattu, like it's further away, it's 60 kilometers away from Paris. So that's even away. And I think she mentioned that they can't pay for the land any further or something on those lines. So yeah, I agree to what Aila is speaking about, real estate playing an important role. Like the state has to own the land.
So also just this is a thought there as well. The city keeps growing, right? As in the city keeps developing one up like years. Like when you start looking at how Chennai is also growing, South Chennai is actually becoming an IT hub. It's already an IT hub now, becoming more of an IT hub as years go by. Kannagi Nagar is actually situated in an area which is basically adjacent to this IT hub. And now when they say that they have to get relocated to Chengalpeta, which is like geographically, it's like more westbound and more inward. And it's also right at the border of the city of Chennai. So when you start looking at it economics wise, you why would you want to do that? Because you want to convert this IT corridor. You would not want to have a resettlement area in an IT corridor. That becomes the logic, as opposed to, are you resettling people? No, we don't. We're not very sure of whether they care or not, but we want to resettle people to a place where we have less of an economic deficit of sorts, or we
Yeah,
have
like
more opportunity.
it adds to what Aila said, no, like you would ideally want to resettle them in a place which would not develop into an urban space. And unfortunately, fortunately, this space is now developing very fast. You have the World Trade Center of sorts building up there. It's becoming huge. So for them to take a decision to take them further away, literally away, shove them in one corner near the border, is because this area is growing and they can't have this, as I said, a huge space like a world in itself right at the center. And even with all the beautification that we speak of and that we see, the realities of what the news speaks about that space, the connotations still remain the same. Yeah.
Yeah, makes sense. Like with there was some discussions that were happening around about the murals that are there in Kannagi Nagar. So I mean, assuming whatever the discussion is, we were wondering as to, could you speak to the people as to what was their opinion or outlook about these murals, and how does this sort of duality or the kind of the position that the government or whoever has taken sort of, in contrary to the services that are to be offered in this public housing versus the initiative of painting murals across the whole housing scheme?
Ritika and I were having an interesting debate about this recently as well. So, okay, the mural painting was not done by the government. It was just supported by the government, but it was an initiative by an NGO who did all that work. And they did an amazing job. They involved the community in doing it. They involved a lot of children, and it was genuinely a sight to see for all of that happening. And there is research in environmental psychology and social planning in general that says, the physical appearance of a place actually makes a lot of difference on how people who live there perceive that place. But I also want to place this in contestation with the fact that this is a place that gets water once in 10 days. This is a place that if you hear that name, you don't get jobs. Like if I am from Kannagi Nagar, the chance that I'll get rejected just because of my identity as a resettled person who was earlier living in a different social geography in the city, which also talks to my caste position, talks to my class position. All of that come into play. And for me, in Indian cities, because identity is such a big issue for us, I'm a little concerned about how this facelift is genuinely going to impact people in their everyday lives. But we also know that there is research and there is work that shows it's been useful.
But the people living there as users of the space, what was their outlook towards this facelift that you just mentioned about? Like, of course, like it might not just appeal them because water just comes once in 10 days, right? Like the painting doesn't matter because there's no water, is as simple as. So like, what was their outlook towards it? Like it can be mixed. I'm not really sure. That's why I was wondering if you can
So
sort of.
So I can tell you what this, Advait, from our entire set of conversations we had with the residents of Kannagi Nagar, whoever we were speaking with, not one person spoke to us about anything that was painting related. I think that speaks for itself as well. There were like as you enter Kannagi Nagar, like the opening of the place, you can see every building has this amazing mural.
Yeah.
Once we get into the buildings and whatnot, no one speaks about it. I mean, at least the people who we were engaging with, no one spoke about it. That's not their concern.
Yeah.
Murals,
Yeah,
we
like
have
I
murals. Murals are great, and the novelty also fades after a point, right? I mean, you have a facelift happening, and that facelift happened. Everyone's clicking pictures. A lot of people go and click pictures as well, for sure. But then once that novelty fades, it just becomes synonymous with having paint. It's very sad
yeah,
to
it's
say this, but
interesting.
yeah.
I don't know if you remember, Bimal, but we were standing in front of this building which was painted really beautifully. Whoever did a great job, and we are standing trying to figure out how this probably has impacted the people, and they'll probably start speaking about it. But the next thing, it's like 6 p.m. in the night. It's getting darker, and people are talking about 3 suicides that have happened in the last week, and like that's the spot where someone was killed by this person. That's the level, and women are literally huddling up around us, and they're expecting that we are here to help. That's another thing that I would probably talk during the course of this discussion is like, you as filmmakers are like, at first go, you're like, these people will help me, but really what will your film really do to them? Like, how will they help you? But what I'm trying to say is that we were just huddled up with all of these discussions about people killing each other, and people committing suicide, and there's this lady who has a mental health problem, she keeps banging the doors. That's all you can talk and discuss in the backdrop of this really beautiful mural, and no one chooses to talk about that. It doesn't matter.
Yeah. I don't know. I mean, looking at the context of Paris and even to Kannagi Nagar, like the people who were sort of resettled from Paris to Kannagi, and also assuming all the people who sort of came from elsewhere, all of the people of Kannagi Nagar might have sort of faced this as a problem where they had to shift from their original occupation because probably their occupation was very uh, location based or very practice based because of the coast. Or for example, so there might be a shift that like all the or most of the residents might have faced, right, in Kannagi Nagar. So was there anything like that when you could speak to the people?
So I remember a bunch of them speaking about, like, they usually take up jobs of the watchman and the office cleaner, because as we said that it's like an IT hub. So there are these huge offices everywhere. So that is one immediate shift that you see. But in that connotation also, a lot of people get rejected because, oh, you're from Kannagi Nagar, uh, because of that identity that's attached to you. But that's the closest occupation change that we could really face. But our focus is mostly on Paris and Anjali. So we kind of got very specific on that research. Yeah.
Because coming from the fact that most like there are some public housings in Mumbai as well that have sort of gone through this outbreak of an epidemic, right? But also considering the context of COVID-19 and the pandemic, how has Kannagi Nagar sort of went through this phase, and have you been in contact with Anjali? And
So, with respect to COVID hitting Kannagi Nagar, I think when we were discussing with Geeta, so initially when COVID hit, they were hit really badly, the Kannagi space. But I think this guy, I'm just Gopal, I'm so sorry, I don't remember his name, but he was actually the one who championed the whole process of having kids come and march through the city, through Kannagi Nagar, and it's literally like alleyways, and making people aware of wear your mask or sanitize. So they had a huge a couple of months where they had a lot of cases in Chennai, in Kannagi Nagar, but I think the youth of the space came together and tried to change things up a little. We haven't been in touch with Anjali since we made the movie. Yeah.
Yeah, so on that note, also one thing that happened synonymous to just the film getting done was the three of us left Chennai. So I think the whole aspect of COVID coming in and like I had a job change. Ritika got into university. Aila also left for Hyderabad as well. So the three of us had to disperse immediately after the film got over, like in a matter of a month or so. We actually had a couple of really nice portraits of both Anjali and Bhupalan, which we wanted to present to them as well, but that couldn't happen because of however our timelines were also aligned. And that's the sad part over there is none of us are going back to Chennai at any point of time in the foreseeable future as well. So there is a little bit of I would say that it's a semicolon from our end over there. Not saying a full stop, it's a semicolon, of course, because I'm pretty sure we'll be able to visit the area again at some point of time. So, yeah.
Yeah, but while we were shooting, it was the first wave was tapering out, and business was in full throttle at that point of time. Like things were really looking good for even Anjali. But I think one thing that happened is she lost her niece, and that also we also had to pause the shoot for a bit. So more than COVID at that point of time, like how we left them, I think that death kind of like weird them out quite a bit. So at that point of time, what we could take away from our talks with Anjali, like she was really demotivated by that. Sadly, as Bimal said, we haven't been in touch with her, but yeah, looking forward.
I mean, like considering the pandemic also, and considering that you guys had to leave the city also, like what were the issues that you sort of came across while shooting the film in terms of talking to people, in terms of entering Kannagi and sort of getting that level of data, or that level of sort of I don't know, insights.
Right. So few things over here. One was the fact that we were entering a space where we were hearing a lot of rumors in general. And as Ritika mentioned a while ago, the first day that we entered Kannagi, our experience was a group of women huddling together and telling us that 3 suicides happened, a murder has happened, and all of that. Our entire perception of the project became a little, we started to become extremely cautious about the venture altogether. Like initially we had planned on renting or acquiring equipment which would give us pristine amounts of, the quality of the film. We wanted to make it in the best way possible as well. Even in our initial discussions with Bina ma'am and the rest of the people over there, we were like, we'll be using certain equipment to shoot the entire piece. But I can tell you from fact that we shot a lot of it with this camera. This was what we used for a lot of it, because we were very, very concerned about how to approach the entire project. That was one. Number two, as we mentioned, the three of us are not native Tamil speakers. So that was it was an interesting challenge for us, because we wanted to explore the space, understand the space as well. But we're not native Tamil speakers. I can understand and speak to a certain extent, but again, the nuances of the language just flow over my head. So we had amazing friends. There's another Geeta who was basically our interpreter and who was also helping us out with a lot of the translations and getting the right communication out. She was basically in charge of that. Ritika was coaching her to figure out how to go about this, how do we conduct the interviews and all of that. So effectively, that was another challenge. This language barrier was a crazy piece for us as well. So the safety aspect of things was definitely one. We were very uncertain of how safe, where the because we were being told that there does exist the concept of a turf war, or a turf. You have to be a little careful about the space that you're entering. And another sad reality is again what Ritika highlighted a while ago. When they see someone come asking for questions, they feel like help is going to be provided, and also we're not, sadly enough, we're not really providing help per se. We're doing a film, we don't know where this is going. And on many occasions, what ends up happening is they feel like they've been cheated. Their stories being sold to people, and people are getting money out of their stories becomes a narrative that is also thrown around. So the whole aspect of whether we can shoot also became like a question as well. And then, of course, I don't think I'll need to highlight anything about how the pandemic was. And specifically, what is also interesting in this particular situation is most of the people who we were talking to felt that COVID-19 was a hoax. So in the meeting that Ritika mentioned that we were in, the trade fisher folk meeting that we were in, the conversation that was going on in that meeting was on the lines of, this is something that's been constructed by the government to deprive us of whatever business and whatnot. That was one of the narratives that were being told in that meeting. And in net effect, what we were dealing with was people who rarely wore masks, if at all. They did not have masks. In a situation where Chennai was also, it was raining like crazy as well. The entire area was semi-flooded, the bus stands and all. I think you can see a little bit of it as well. Like, we shot in a space where once the water cleared a little bit, we started shooting only then. But our research phase, we went there, we were completely drenched. Like our clothes, I still remember we were so concerned because we had no clue of what was going to be our case, because we were speaking to everyone without, they were not wearing masks. And on top of that, we didn't know what the situation was going to be as well. And honestly, the areas that we were visiting, especially in Paris, the hygiene was it was something that was hurtful, especially when it rains. It's right next to the bus stand. It is very, very, that situation is extremely difficult to see. And so these were a certain set of challenges that we had in general while we were conducting the shoot, when we were doing the film as well. And we thought that it was a very conscious decision to choose minimal amount of equipment to make sure. And it was, a lot of it was guerrilla. We were doing a proper guerrilla style filmmaking for most of the B-roll that you see. It's mostly like that. So yeah, I think Ritika can add on to it as well. So.
Yeah, I'll come back to what Nondita has asked here, but I think another question I think a lot of filmmakers or documentary filmmakers may face this is the whole.
Ritika, should I just read out the question if you don't mind?
Yeah, sure. But I'll get to that in a bit. Yeah.
Sure. I'll just read out the question, then you can probably continue.
Yes.
So Nandita Korea Mehrotra asked that, would you consider making a longer film on this subject by re-editing or making a film or similar issues that you sort of considered in this film? And because, I mean, as we sort of spoke about it during the discussion also, that they sort of manifest themselves in multiple cities across India. So if anybody of you would sort of want to take that up.
Yeah, so I was talking about the aspect of ethics, and then I'll get to the question. Like, we were concerned like how we are going around with this lady all around the place, and she's really not making business, and we reached a point where she was hesitant in sharing things with us, and we were like, how should we really compensate this time that she's spending with us? And that question does come up. As much as we can't really help them directly with the film that we make, apart from awareness, that too in communities beyond their reach, sometimes we thought that we would, we finally decided we'll compensate her for the amount of time that we were talking to her, the business that she makes. And also, like, about language, it's interesting now in the film that you'll see a lot of her hands and close-up of her faces and all of that. That's a metaphor of how I would feel most of the time when she's speaking, because I really can't make sense of the context of what she's saying unless my interpreter really, turns back to me and says, okay, she was saying this. So a lot of these close-ups of hands and eyes and her face and the wrinkles manifest from me not really understanding her. When she would talk, I would just spend a lot of time looking at her and the space. So I think that kind of manifests in the film now that I look at it. I'll quickly, people can add, but so we think that Paris and putting Paris and Kannagi together in a film like this may have not done justice, because livelihoods in both these cases are very different. How they approach it in Kannagi and how they approach in Paris are two very different things. And I think, and they come with a lot of different problems and constraints to themselves. So we would definitely, like, if we do end up re-editing and making it into a bigger film, which we were thinking, we would either want to make a series, like we hop from like city to city and try to document it, or we could, go deeper into Kannagi Nagar, because I think there lies a lot of stories there. And it's not just about a person trying to make a livelihood, but there are these other connotations attached to it, just this about how parenting happens in Kannagi Nagar in itself is a story which can be delved in. But yeah, others can be.
Yeah, also, if I were to add over here, I think we'd spoken about this as well. There was this evening, our last day of shoot with Angela in Kannagi Nagar. We were just having a word with her, and we were just walking with her on the street. We were just we were just on the street talking to her and walking. I was just taking some people on the side, and another woman comes to us, starts speaking about her story. And then there's another woman on the side who starts talking about her story. And then once we say bye to Anjali, this one woman comes with us and keeps talking about her story. And in what I'm trying to say here also is that Anjali's story is one story, which is it's not a story that we've not heard before. We've all heard this story before. But this is one among the million stories that are actually there. And what's sad is all of these stories are very similar. So the story specifically, even though it might not sound spectacular, the mass of the story, or rather the number of stories that are there, I think if we were to look at doing this film again, just having the number of stories again to make people, I mean, I don't know what this film can do in the general sense of the term, but the number of people who've experienced something like this is crazy. It's like unfathomable, at least to my mind. So,
but Anjali is always going to be that metaphor, I feel, in the film.
Absolutely, Angela is one among the many who have been displaced and who are struggling to figure out how to go about things.
Yeah.
And Anjali is actually one of the more enterprising ones. Anjali is actually still one of the people who has been, she's been pushing. She is an absolute inspiration. Like, even as Ritika was mentioning, her niece passed away. She was literally, I mean, we could see the change that there was there. But she was like,
we thought we would not be able to shoot with her anymore. But then she was like, we'll do this. We'll take 2 days break, but we'll get back to this on the third. So yeah, she's one among those enterprising ones. But there are people who give up and they go to Kannagi Nagar and they restart. Like, there are stories like, a funeral procession can't go through one area. It can only go through another. Like, small stories like that, So the world in Kannagi Nagar is completely different. So if you do make a film, like a larger film on this, I think we would like to delve deeper into Kannagi Nagar.
Okay. I think that was a good enough conversation and discussion for the film.
Yes.
It sort of brings up the
It's been
character.
a long time since we made it, so this was really interesting to,
I mean, we can. I feel we can go on, but I think this is a good place to sort of pause. I would say stop and just pause.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Ritika, Aila, Bimal, and Bina, who helped all of you guys mentor this film. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining in. We will be back next week with the last rerun of this series. Thank you so much, everybody, once again.
Thank you for having us. Bye.
Bye. Bye.